Well, kia ora, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our council workshop afternoon. Today we are talking all things watery. Waikato Water's Done Well, obviously, is front of mind at present, and today we have a handful of presentations to go through and matters to address in that space. So listen, I will hand over to Steph to provide more formal sort of introduction, but welcome everybody and look forward to our considering these matters.
Can I just grab your daily schedule, please, because mine walk about my lunch. Thank you. Afternoon, everybody. It was a quick lunch break, but nice to be back in the room. So I just want to welcome Carl and Simon from Simpson Grierson. Kia ora, Simon. Can you hear us?
Kia ora, good afternoon. Yes, I can. Thanks.
Yeah, great. Thank you for joining us. And we don't have Sinead with us today. Nope. Yep. Okay. So today's really the next step in the series of workshops that you've been having around the potential model for Waikato Water's Done Well. As you know, the mayors have been meeting regularly. We recently held our elected member day at Karapiro and heard from Brad Olsen and the minister. The CEs have workshopped 3 times, I think, on the constitutional documents. And all of this is necessary because should the 6 councils and Taupua agree formally over this period of time, and everyone is making those decisions in coming weeks, then the incumbent responsibility, of course, is to be ready for a 1 July go live date next year. That is an incredibly tight time frame to establish such a large infrastructure business. We're also having to align with Bill 3, which is coming through, and I'm sure Carl will talk to that, but in August of this year, so in a matter of weeks away, and we have to be lining up to be able to meet the requirements of Bill 3 for waters as it comes through. So we are very clear that we cannot predetermine your decision, which will be on either the 21st or 23rd of July. But we've now gone through public hearings, public consultation, sorry. We've got hearings for Local Waters Done Well next week, and we look forward to those 10 odd submitters who are coming in. I'm not sure who's got the exact numbers, but about 10 submitters next week. But it's in parallel, this work has been carried out to ascertain what the company would need to look like and to be able to formalise the company and establish it in a timely manner. And so today, prior to your formal decision, is to update you. Carl had given you that briefing in the last workshop, but this is to go through those shareholding documents, the constitutional documents in more detail, and give you some insight into those. As you will have read on diligence. So, and I want to acknowledge Simpson Grierson, who have been providing advice to us all the way along. The 7 councils themselves have got a legal advice, and that's provided by Russell McVeigh, who have been providing oversight and have been in the meetings with all the CEs as we've workshopped the documents. So they provide overarching guidance to the collective of councils, but we in turn have taken specific advice from Simpson Grierson as to the Waipa interests in that, and making sure that I can have confidence and Carl can have confidence to put these documents before you with certainty. So I just want to acknowledge Simon and Diana, who in the background there, who's been doing significant work. Sharon's in the room as well. There's a lot of work in the background to develop these. So Carl, I hope that's been a useful intro. I want to acknowledge you and for your ongoing role on behalf of Waipa in terms of leading these commercial arrangements for us. So thank you. And on that note, I'll hand to you.
Thanks, Steph. You pretty much summarised my whole presentation, so we might be able to skip the slides. There is a slide pack. Hopefully that will come up on the screen, and a lot of the content you will have already seen. So some of it will be a recap. As Steph said, Simon is available to answer any detailed questions that I don't have at my fingertips. If anyone's got any detailed points about the documents that they want to talk to or ask about, this is the purpose of the workshop. And if we can't answer it today, we will come back to you with answers pretty quickly after the workshop if necessary. Steph's already summarised the purpose of the workshop. It's building up to build our understanding of what this organisation is going to look like, so that when we do come to the point of making a formal decision, we know exactly what this company is going to look like. But also the other shareholding councils know the same when they make decisions. And as Steph pointed out, some of those councils are making decisions next week. So those things are imminent. I'll just start talking through some slides. I assume you've got them in front of you if they're not on the screen. So we've obviously been on a journey. We all hopefully recall that we signed a heads of agreement in December last year, which set out the basis of our agreement. With the other councils, what we've been doing since then is building on that, fleshing it out, and getting to the point where we understand explicitly what the relationship is between the shareholders and the company, which is captured in the shareholders agreement, what the constitution of that company is, and how the transfer of the businesses of each of the councils will happen over time and under what arrangements. As Steph said, that's been developed by the program transition team that's been working under the chief executives of the councils and with oversight of the mayoral group. And we've had a discussion about that, and there was also the Karapiro workshop where you heard from Brad Olsen on his views of the model, etc. So in the slide pack, there was a set of sort of a reminder of some of the key content that was in that heads of agreement. So there's a set of principles that we agreed in the heads of agreement. None of those have changed. They include things like partnership, working together, no surprises, and maintaining confidence between the parties. We need to continue to build goodwill, and I guess there is that's a good one to highlight in terms of this process. So whilst we aren't making our decision until later in July, other councils, as I said, are making decisions next week. So they need to be comfortable that Waipā is aligned in terms of our understanding of what that organisation might look like. Thank you. Now I'm in control of the slides. It's a bit dangerous. Big job. It could be. Well, if that's the biggest job, it'll be fine. So you will have seen these boxes before. This is the content that was in the heads of agreement, and you'll see another iteration of these boxes shortly, which shows how we've evolved that content into the current set of documents that you've seen in your pre-reading. I should have mentioned at the start, I'm happy to take questions, but I might just stop at a logical break point rather than interrupting the flow, if that's all right. This is a new slide you might not have seen before, but it's useful context about the scale and size and what the CCO, the Waikato Waters Limited CCO, will do. Once all 6 councils are into the entity's about $155 million of revenue in the first financial year after that, has about $1.6 billion of assets, will own and operate all of the water and wastewater assets for those 6 councils that are coming straight into what we've called stage 2. It will provide stormwater services under contract for those councils that wish to do so, which is not all 6, most likely, but does include Waipā. It will be able to access finance via their LGFA because we will have set that up. And it will be governed by an independent board with oversight from the shareholders representative forum, and we can talk about that shortly. So that's a bit of background. Has anyone got anything they wanted to raise in regard to that before I proceed with the next bit?
Yeah, thanks. Can I just go back to the ownership is 7 councils, but the initial stage 2 is only 6 councils.
Yes,
And I'm sure that you might be discussing transitional costs later on. But a question that I have, the transitional costs, they will be just shared by the 6 stage 2 members, or will the 7th owning council have to meet some of those transitional costs?
So the costs of establishing the entity will be financed by the entity, and they will be recovered over time from the surpluses of revenue from the operations. This is a bit of a long-winded answer, but I'll get to it in a sec. So effectively, all of those stage 2 councils will pay a share of those establishment costs over time, or sorry, the customers of those councils will pay for those establishment costs over time. The 7th council, which is Taupo, is required to enter into a services arrangement with the CCO, and that the services fees are charged under that contract will contribute towards those establishment costs. So in effect, all 7 are contributing to those establishment costs over time.
That raises another couple of questions from me, but I'll leave it until later because probably getting into nuts and bolts there a little bit. But I might even ask Steph later on that. Thanks.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. I've seen through quite a few comments already, Carl, and some of them have explained themselves on the way, actually, as I read further. I was focusing on that slide about what is Waikato Water Limited, and it mentions it owns and operates the water and wastewater businesses. And I'm interested in hearing more from you about how it will effectively participate in the planning processes for new developments, and particularly, you know, what's going to be the situation with development contributions that are already factored into any new developments at a point in time, and obviously they extend out into the future, but where the changes made to Waikato Water, do those development contributions, I imagine they still have to be paid to the council, don't they? Or, I mean, like, how's that going to work? Or will the water entity be able to take that over as a future year payment? Yeah. Have you worked out how that's going to operate?
Not in a massive amount of detail, but at a principal level, I can talk to that. So effectively, those developers will still have to pay development contributions that contribute to water and wastewater assets, whether those are in the ground today or will be in the ground in the future. At this point in time, the expectation is that on day 1, there will be some transitional arrangements with each of the councils, so that Waipa would continue to administer the development contribution policy on behalf of the CCO for water and wastewater, and collect those development contributions and then pass them to the CCO as revenue. How long those transitional arrangements last is a matter to be agreed between each of the councils and the CCO, but it's likely to be at least a couple of years. Yep. Okay, I'll move on. So building on the foundations of the heads of agreement and all the work that's been done is the foundational documents of the Waikato Waters Company. There's 3 parts to that. There's the company constitution, the shareholders agreement, and the transfer agreement. The shareholders agreement and the constitution work together. They set out the rights and obligations of each of the councils and the CCO in relation to each other. They formalise some of the provisions of the Companies Act, and they set the company up to succeed over time based on what the shareholders have agreed. The transfer agreement is a one-off transactional document required by the legislation, which is the agreement between the company and each of the councils, so there will be 6 of those, as to how the water businesses of each of those councils transfers across. The reason why we've agreed that now is that so all of the councils have transparency as to how that's going to happen and are comfortable that there's no council getting favourable terms, for example, in relation to that business, because that's going to be an agreement between the CCO and each council individually. So what we've agreed is a set of principles and a template. So the purpose of the Constitution, as I said, sets the overall framework for the CCO, sets out the rights and powers, and it will be publicly available online. It differs from the shareholders agreement, which is a contract between the 7 shareholders and the company. And in normal practice would not be a publicly available document, but given that we're a local government entity, it's probably quite likely that that document would be available to the public. But in normal private companies, shareholders agreements are not public documents. The Constitution is largely, and Simon can comment if he wants to, is largely a templated document. There's not a large amount of bespoke content in that document. It's obviously tailored for our expectations about how the CCO is going to need to operate, but it's largely a templated document. The shareholders agreement is much more bespoke. So the remainder of the content of this presentation is focused more on the shareholders agreement than the Constitution, but happy to take questions on either if you have them. So if we move into the shareholders agreement, this is the purpose. You will have seen this slide before. It's not new. I've probably covered most of that content, to be honest. The key thing is it's an agreement between the 7 councils. So we've developed that jointly with the 7 councils. It doesn't just set out the role of the CCO, it sets out the roles in relation to the CCO of each of those councils and between each other. So that's important. This is what it formalises. Again, you will have seen most of this before. Why are we establishing the CCO? Who owns it? We know that's owned by the 7 councils. Who makes the decisions and how are they made, including how the directors are appointed. Cover that in a minute. What is the shareholders representative forum and how does it work? And then how do we manage the financial requirements of the CCO? And specifically how the water services strategy is set as a requirement of the legislation.
Yeah, could I just ask about the appointment of directors?
Yep.
It's more about the removal of directors because that's also possible. Like, have you given any thought at what would be something that would justify the removal of a director? Or, it didn't set out in any of the documents what actions or behaviour, apart from being disqualified. But I was just wondering whether or not non-performance might be one or something,
So part of appointment of the directors will be, there'll be performance expectations of the board and there'll be an appointment process for each of the directors. If they're not meeting those criteria, then that might be a trigger for the SRF to consider that removal of that, either one or more directors or potentially the whole board.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Next bit is about the transfer agreement. Will I click that? Yep. I was, but I can come back.
Can I just, I think some of these things are where the CEs have had really good discussions about in previous workshops, and there are a couple of things that we improved. For example, we felt that the shareholder forum might want to be able to establish subcommittees if they were dealing with particular issues, so they needed to be given delegated authority to be able to do that. What is normal for a shareholders forum as well is to be able to request strategic work or commission work to be done that provides them with information they're looking for. And so it gave the shareholders forum members the opportunity to request that from the CCO. and a process around that. To one of you, your discussion around this table around the initial price pathway and the direction around that. So that was moved from the shareholders agreement to the statement of expectations. And so we've been quite responsive. There have been really good conversations in the CE workshops to make sure that this is effective as possible. So I've really enjoyed those conversations, and they've been really robust workshops. And I think we've added a lot of value, which has been great. Or sorry, I should say a lot of value has been added through the CE workshops. Bill.
Coming to this a little bit late, but can you tell me, are there any exit or termination provisions?
Not directly. There is a negotiation required should a council wish to exit.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
well, effectively, there would be a requirement to establish the amount of debt that the exiting shareholder is going to take with them when they leave. And we can't really agree that now, because it might be okay if we did it for 2 years from now, but if we did it from 20 years from now, there'd be so many unknowns that it would be almost impossible to agree that now, I suggest. So effectively, the key thing is going to be how that debt is allocated to an exiting shareholder. And ultimately, that's going to have to be a proposal from the board to the shareholders representative forum and then a vote.
I do totally understand, looking forward, but sometimes you also got to look at what happens if something doesn't occur.
Yeah. Do you want to ask Simon about that, or just, I mean, the point's taken, and I think there are matters which I think the board, once the board is formed, will turn its mind to as well, in terms of its corporate strategy going forward. Mm.
It's effectively a decision for the shareholders representative forum. So, unless you've got anything to add on that topic, Simon.
Look, I think you've summarised it well, Carl, in that the important point here is we can't determine now exactly what an exit would look like. And obviously from the council who's considering exiting, it wouldn't be as simple as just saying we're going to exit. They would have to go through a process within the current legislative framework, or the framework that applied at the time, in order to determine what their alternative strategy would be. So obviously the entity and the board of the entity would have plenty of notice about this potentially happening. And so it would very much be a negotiated process to ensure that one council leaving wouldn't adversely affect the other councils on the way out.
My button's not working.
Can I just jump in there quickly, just to augment, and it's not strictly part of it, but the mayors were really keen to make sure the success of this in part hinges around the directors, and you don't want to get sort of the B, C, D, F, G team. So we've been really proactive in trying to get the ball rolling, and in terms of that appointment process, we've agreed to employ a recruiter who has just been involved with the Hamilton City Waikato Water Done Well grouping. So they're all over who the pool is, if you like. And there's actually a meeting taking place right now by the other Waikato Water Done Well mayors, just to fine tune some of the parts of that process. But that ball's already starting to roll, even though we just didn't want to get to the milestones, go, okay, now we need to look at finding people. We wanted to make sure we got, the first or second bite at the cherry, so to speak, to just assure you that's already in train.
Slight technical glitch, those slides. Transfer agreement. So as I said, it implements the transfer of the water services. It's an individual contract and it's required by the legislation. So the template is largely driven by the requirements of the legislation. The principles that are in the shareholders agreement are the thing that we have agreed amongst the shareholders. So the process, we've probably covered a big chunk of this as well. Oh, there we go, working. It's just that slide. So I'll just skip through this. As Steph said, the CCO has, the program transition team has a legal advisor, which is Russell McVeigh. The CEs have workshopped a whole lot of issues matters. 6 workshops, Steph, not 3. Yeah, you've lost count. Maybe you're away for one. The mayors have obviously provided guidance and have looked at some of the matters as well. And then there's been some interim reviews by both Waipa and other council staff, and we have some Singresin providing us input from Waipa's perspective, all of which Steph said before. So the key differences between the shareholders agreement and the heads of agreement, so thinking back to what we agreed in December, the fundamental differences are that most of the councils are going to stage 2 or asset owning, effectively transferring their waters business in their entirety to the CCO on a transfer date, whereas the original heads of agreement allowed for people to come in as shareholders but receive services, what we call a stage 1 shareholder. So the only council that's still in that boat is Taupo, and there are now some special provisions around how Taupo intends to do that, which we'll come to in a minute. But effectively, everybody else is coming in the same way that Waipa is intending to Waipa has consulted on to bring its assets and its business in one go. And there's a step process just to get the company incorporated rather than providing services. So bearing that in mind, some of the content, so this is the updated set of boxes that were on the previous slide. Some of the content of what was in the heads of agreement have flowed through to the shareholders agreement. Some of it has had to be tweaked because things have moved on, both for those fundamental points I just talked about or other changes and things that we have happened in the meantime. And then there's been a few new things that we've realised we needed to include in the shareholders agreement. And that's effectively captured in that the colour coding of those boxes. So all the ones that are in blue effectively mirror what was in the original agreement we had in December. And the grey ones are either new ones or evolutions of the ones that we agreed before. And so the rest of the slides are effectively just covering off some of those specific issues in more detail about what's agreed, particularly the grey ones. Anyone got any questions on that, or do you want to wait until we get into the specific details?
Yeah, it really seems as if you've got the whole process mapped out. And I'm sure that at some stage you've done a risk assessment of that process. What are the risks of this not actually coming to a successful conclusion? Are there any that we should be aware of?
Can I ask a question of clarification? Do you mean just this legal process, or are you meaning the entire transition?
I'm talking about the entire
Okay,
transition.
so at the moment, the chief executives are doing a comprehensive piece of work in terms of a change management model, which takes all of that into consideration, and I will be updating you on that brief in the near future. So we're doing a massive piece of work around that. It's a great question.
So we'll just cover off a few of the topics. So ownership and accountability, probably talked about some of this.
Sorry, just a note there that the bit in the brackets just talks about, it looks like the consultation or involvement for iwi is being led by only the iwi Chairs Committee. Am I reading that right? Not as opposed to mana whenua generally? Because not all the iwi are represented in the iwi chairs.
So where that's come from, Bill, is that it's couched like that at this point in time because actually the Waters Reform response in the Waikato actually came from the Iwi Chairs Forum, calling the Waikato Mayors Forum together back, well, a year or more before my time. Susan will tell you that, and saying, let's as a Waikato not just sit here and wait for central government response, let's progress a response ourselves that work for us. And subsequent to that, the Waikato Mayoral and Iwi Chairs Forum has progressed this piece of work. So at this point in time, the work We have all been talking to individual iwi mana whenua groups in our own respective rohi, but at this point in time, the agreement reflect that because those are the leaders who have been leading this piece of work. Now, going forward, both we as councils are very clear that we need to retain, nurture and maintain our relationships with iwi and mana whenua directly, that the shareholder forum will continue to have a relationship and have responsibility with the iwi chairs, but the organisation itself, once it's established and operational, will need to have its own relationships with iwi mana whenua groups, papakainga, marae, wherever they are delivering water services to, they will need to be working with those people on the ground. So there are a number of touch points. This isn't exclusive, it's an and.
Okay. So we probably covered some of this off on this slide as well. This slide has two parts. The middle bit just shows the relationship between shareholding councils, the shareholders representative forum, and then the entity at the bottom, represented by the board. And then the left-hand side is the provisions. So it's a recut of the previous boxes. Some of those provisions relate to how the transition happens between today and 1st of July 26 for us. And then the right-hand side are the provisions that relate to the enduring settings of the relationship between the shareholders and the CCO.
So, yeah, so Carl, I'm interested in whether or not other people could be shareholders other than councils, because in the constitution, it's pretty clear it's just councils. I'm thinking in the future where we might want to have iwi as a capital partner in particular projects, or a public-private partnership to get something going on a larger scale. They might prefer to have some kind of capital arrangement. Yeah. So is there any flexibility to allow those sort of future arrangements to be entered into? You know, I was doubtful given the wording in the constitution.
I'll let Simon comment as well, but my comment is the legislation's pretty clear that only councils can be shareholders in a water services CCO. But there are potential opportunities for other arrangements like what you talk about in the future. No work's been done on what those might look like, I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, a possibility is to have little subsidiaries for particular activities or projects. I don't know.
There are lots of structures that
Yeah.
could facilitate other
Yeah.
investment of capital into assets.
Yeah. Okay.
But it will be driven by what is allowed for under the final legislation,
Yeah.
and future decisions that I don't think anyone's done any work on specifically, to be honest.
Yeah, as long as it's not ruled out, as long as it deals.
I think the only thing that's ruled out by the current drafting of the bill is that councils must be the shareholders of the entity.
Yeah,
Simon, I don't know if you want to comment.
That's correct, Carl. It does expressly provide that the only shareholder of these water organisations could be a council or a community trust. It also says that the water organisation can't grant security over the water assets. So the ability for the water organisation to seek other funding outside of LGFA is also constrained by that. So that's just something to bear in mind as well.
Can we have a definition of that community trust then? Because many of us iwi under entity trusts.
I'd have to let Simon answer that question, sorry.
Yeah, so we haven't looked at that specifically for the purposes of this work, but the intention is really to pick up the situation where there are existing community trusts, such as ones that currently own electricity lines companies or similar, who might own water assets in their regions, and just enabling that to continue on. But there are significant restrictions around what has to be in the trust deed of those trusts to again ensure that control isn't lost, and in particular that they don't become a vehicle for any type of privatisation or other arrangement, which is inconsistent with the overall intent of Bill 3.
Yeah.
Thanks, Simon. That's helpful.
So, sorry, shareholder obligations. What would we be signing up to if and when we sign up to the shareholders agreement? So we are signing up to be a stage 1 shareholder. So we own the initial shares of the organisation jointly with the other shareholders. We agree to transfer our water business in on a transfer date, and the proposed transfer dates are in the bottom half of the page. We agree to complete a transfer agreement with the CCO on the template that's attached to the shareholders agreement and in accordance with the principles that are agreed in there. And we continue to operate our water business in the way that's intended in our LTP until that transfer date, i.e. The shareholding councils must sort of maintain the quality of the assets and the services they're delivering and not stop doing what they're obligated to do. So that protects the interests of all the other shareholders. Those are the current planned dates. As everybody's aware, I think we're in the first tranche of councils proposed on the 1st July 26, and there's a 12-month window to get the other 3 in. And then Taupo has a slightly different set of obligations because, as we said before, they don't have an agreed transfer date. So they will be a stage 1 shareholder, but they won't have voting rights. So they will participate in the shareholders representative forum, but if it comes to a vote, they won't have a vote. They will enter into a service level agreement prior to our go live date. And that service level agreement will set the framework under which they will receive services from the CCO, but won't necessarily specify the exact services because, don't forget, by that date, the CCO won't actually be operational, so won't necessarily be able to commit to operating a particular service for Taupo. It's going to be focused on getting the businesses of the other 6 shareholding councils into the CCO. But prior to 1 July 27, the CCO and Taupo must have agreed some services to be delivered by the CCO for Taupo, i.e. it must have actively engaged with the CCO. And then it has an obligation to do the review that it's said Taupo is going to do under its consultation approach, which the first one of those is in 2027, and then they have one more option to agree a transfer date by 2030. And if they don't, then their shareholding would fall away and they would need to come in at a later date after that as any other council wanting to participate in the CCO. So that's Taupo. I don't know whether anyone's got any questions on those day 1 obligations. Otherwise, we can click over to decision making. The shareholders representative forum represents the shareholding councils. Each council has a representative on that forum. By default, it's the person who is that representative would be the mayor, but effectively each council can determine who their representative is and notify the CCO in writing should they wish to have another representative. The key role of the shareholders representative forum: oversee and provide direction to the board on behalf of the shareholders and coordinate the inputs of those council shareholders to the interface with the company. One of the changes that came out of discussions with the mayors and the CEs was to allow the SRF to appoint an independent chair. So the SRF can either elect from amongst themselves a chair or appoint an independent chair if they wish to. By default, decision making is by consensus, but ultimately the chair can decide if consensus is not going to be reached, and in that case, decisions go to a vote, and we'll cover off what that means on the next slide. And then the council delegates specific matters to the SRF rep to make at the shareholders representative forum. And in most cases, there would be an opportunity for councils to be consulted on those things before they are decided.
Can I just ask a question on that? And you're talking about the alternate be appointed, and that's as a permanent alternate to the mayor. But if the mayor is the appointed representative, is there an alternate opportunity still for attendance at that forum if the mayor's not available?
Definitely the idea of the appointed alternate is for that person to be available to be the representative at the forum if the mayor is not available for a meeting. Yeah.
It's on the later slide.
Carl, is
Sorry?
the SRF open or closed to the public?
I don't think it's envisaged to be a public forum by default. Yeah, but I don't know whether Diana or Simon want to comment.
And follow-up question, yeah, does Lagoima apply to it? or not?
Yeah, that was going to be my what I was about to say. It's a council forum, so I don't see any reason why Lagoima wouldn't apply. Yeah, I don't know, with Simon, have you got a view on that? I know you're not a public law expert, but
I'm not, but that would be my view as well, given the nature of the participants in it and the roles they're, undertaking.
because they're representatives of council, so yeah, I suspect so. That's a little bit small, but I think you've hopefully got that in the pack in front of you. So this is the matters that are reserved, i.e. are responsibility of the shareholders. There are 3 different voting scenarios. One where the shareholders representative forum members vote 1 vote each, i.e. by number. So, 5 out of 6 vote yes or no. There is a vote by resolution, which means you're voting as you with your shareholding, i.e. what percentage of shareholding you own. And under a 6 council stage 2 shareholding, we own 33% of, or we're expected to own 33% of the stage 2 shares when all the councils are in. And then there's a special resolution which requires both the required number of individual votes and the percentage votes. The most common reserved matter that is going to be on the table at the shareholders representative forum is appointing, or as Claire pointed out, removing directors, although hopefully the latter of those doesn't happen all the time, which are vote by number, and also approving the statement of expectation, which is also by number. So what that means is each of the 6 shareholders get the same number of votes at the table for those 2 matters. The less frequent things like admitting a new shareholder or in the hopefully very unlikely situation that one exits are by percentage vote. So I don't know whether anyone's got any questions on any of things in those tables or the way the voting works. Recognising that, or remembering that this only happens if the shareholders representative forum members haven't reached consensus, i.e. there's disparity of views around the table. Yeah. Hopefully not in the first at the first meeting. Yeah. Okay. Probably covered some of this off. The key roles of the SRF: appoint and remove directors, oversee preparation and approval of the statement of expectation, set the performance indicators and measures to be used to monitor the CCO and effectively the board, receive the performance evaluation of the board, reserve matters as we talked about on the previous slide, receive and consider half yearly the reports from the CCO, provide council feedback on, for example, the water services strategy. So that's the coordination role.
Carl, could I just ask you a question about the reports? So, I presume that the shareholder representative forum could actually request more frequent reporting. It's just that I'm very mindful that when we had the workshops and Marlon Bridges was here about monitoring the CCO, and the message I got from him was that we really need to make sure that it's frequent enough to ensure that it's on track and that we don't have nasty surprises and things like that. And his recommendation was to have more frequent rather than less frequent reporting, certainly at the beginning. Yeah, so I'm just anxious to make sure that there will be the opportunity to get more frequent reports than just the half yearly ones, if we want to.
So I think the answer to your question is yes. What this is trying to set out is a minimum requirement. So what we didn't want to do was through the development of this was to establish a minimum benchmark that was too frequent. So this is setting that like at least 6 monthly. Yeah. So the CCO board, there's 3 stages. So this is the directors. So the all things being equal, the intent subject to council decision making is to incorporate the company after at the end of July. To do that, we need to have 1 or more directors to register the company on the Companies Office website. So at the initial board is going to be the 6 stage 2 council CEs, i.e. Steph from our side. Doesn't include Taupo. DA stands for Delegated Authority. Apologies, Claire, that was should have been expanded. So basically in the shareholders agreement, there is a prescribed set of delegations that board has, i.e. it's not a fully functioning board. It has specific role. And it only lasts for a period of in the order of 4 to 6 weeks until the establishment or transition board is appointed by the SRF. So as Susan indicated, the start of that process has already commenced on the premise that this timeline is pretty tight, and that if we are proceeding, then we need to get this independent board in place before the legislation is approved in August. So the transition board is appointed by the SRF. There is a transition board skills matrix agreed in the shareholders agreement, and it will have at least 3 independent directors, i.e. the initial board chief executives fall off as soon as the transition board is established. And then the idea is to have the operational and at least a further 2 directors appointed prior to the company becoming operational in July. And there's a full board matrix in the document. Sets out the skills and capabilities of the board. Any questions on that before I move on to statement of expectation? Cool. So statement of expectation. So sets out the shareholders' combined expectations. The legislation requires that there's only one and it's combined, not individual ones, which I think some other CCOs have. Sets the priorities and strategic direction for the CCO, informs and guides decisions, and importantly, the CCO's preparation of the water services strategy, which is required under the legislation. Must be for 10 years, like an LTP. And the first one is due 31 December 2026, which would then give the CCO 6 months to prepare and finalise its water services delivery strategy before 1 July 27, which is required under the Ledge. Yep.
So just a point of clarification there, like at the top point is the statement of expectation is a combined one. Yeah, and so what assurance will we have that if Waipa or indeed any individual council's got some specific needs or, I don't know, concerns that it definitely wants addressed that might not be able to be captured in a combined statement? Yeah, what are the mechanisms open to the council to sort of make sure that they're definitely going to be covered off in some way or other? I mean, I can't actually foresee, Steph's often talked about the CCO being a plan taker, so anything planning wise should be able to reflect the individual councils, what they're wanting to see in their plans, but there may be something else it's just, I'm just concerned, should we be a bit more cautious about that and how can we make sure that any specific things that an individual council might want can have it in there.
So I might talk
You
to
go
that. Carl,
first,
do you want to add
Yeah.
if,
No, you
and
go
tell me if
first.
I'm getting it wrong?
Yeah.
So the statement of expectations will be clearly, drafted with great clarity to make sure that it is expressly directing the board in terms of the expectations of the six. But don't forget that we're writing our water services plan, and that is should be a very clear outline of Waipa needs, expectations, the program of work already programmed ahead. And so the CCO is obviously receiving the water services plan, and we would expect to see once the CCO starts to prepare its water services strategy and plan that our needs are carried forward very clearly in that. Around that sits, like we're looking at a lot of hard stuff here in terms of documentation, constitution, structure. To me, and what I heard also from Marlon and the chat from Taswater, is that a lot of the success of this is about relationship and communication. So the soft stuff of the CE and the chair of the board coming to meet with us as Waipa District Council, the direct relationship between the mayor and the chair of the board, the direct relationship between the CE and I, and then the expectations of the broader context for Waipa being ahuaki, our revised LTP, and being able to be really clear, our district plan, the instruction we give to this CCO to work with the Hamilton City Council, Waikato District Council, their CCO, to build the same Lego blocks as we've talked about. So there are a number of other softer ways around this as well, which to me are equally as important as these very structured strategy and form documents.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything to correct in that, Steve. Pretty good. I was going to say the same.
Great. It's always good when you
Word for word.
get tested in public and you're on the same page.
Okay, so pricing, financing and debt, we're nearly at the end. So transition pricing. So basically there's a couple of phases. So noting that prior to transfer, each council undertakes to continue its water services business, which includes revenue and pricing in accordance with its most recently published annual plan or LTP. From day one, effectively the CCO will implement pricing that is the same structure as what is currently in place, but will set the prices, and billing will continue. The transition strategy sets out that the billing will continue to be provided by each of the councils, because the combined view was that transferring billing, which is one of the key interfaces with customers, was a significantly higher risk activity, and therefore we would not choose to do that on day one. And then from 1 July 2027, so that's year one for us, and then from year two, the water services delivery strategy will set out pricing and forecast revenue plans. The statement that's included on the bottom of the page, which was previously in the shareholders agreement, is now agreed to feed into the statement of expectation, rather than be locked into the shareholders agreement, which is the point Steph made at the beginning.
Sorry, just the cost of that billing, will that be, council have to absorb that, or is that will be on charge to the CCO?
Yeah, correct. So there's a couple of transition services. Billing is one. Some of the receiving of calls from customers for faults and those sort of things is another one. So part of the establishment process is to agree with each of the councils what that interface looks like and the likely costs of those, or the costs of those services, and those services will be paid for by the CCO. Financing and debt. Financing of establishment costs. So the shareholders representative forum approves the budget for the establishment of the CCO. That will need to be done at the first shareholders representative forum, which is hopefully the end of July. The immediate financing of those costs is a requirement of each of the shareholding councils. So we will be financing a share of those costs up until the time that the CCO can achieve financing approval from the LGFA. And at that point, which is as in the current plan, would be towards the end of this calendar year, the CCO will repay any financing that the council has undertaken. So effectively, the council is effectively no impact by the time the LGFA financing is approved. So let's assume that's within 6 months, then that's repaid. In a more ongoing setting basis, in order for the CCO to be able to access LGFA funding, as with all CCOs that do that, they require their shareholding councils to guarantee their borrowings. There's a structure that has been developed by LGFA and DIA to do that. Each council will only guarantee a proportional share of the debt, so no one council is liable for all of, in the event of default, is liable for all of the CCO's debt. And that proportionality is based on how much debt you take in and then a shareholding basis of future movements in debt. So if you take in 10% of the debt on day one, you guarantee 10% on day one. And then if you are 20% of the shareholding, then for each dollar increase, you guarantee 20% of that future debt. It's worth noting that there's a significant framework around both from LGFA, but also within the legislative settings about which would indicate the likelihood of that guarantee ever being called is very remote. And the other point to make is that LGFA has said that the guarantee that's provided by any council doesn't impact that council's, its view of the council's credit rating or borrowing capacity. Yeah. So I don't know whether anyone's got any other questions on that slide.
Look, a really super pedantic point. You said that the water entity can't grant security over the assets. We don't own them anymore, nor do we own the revenue stream of them, but we do hold the guarantee. Yeah. I mean, in the incredibly unlikely event of the guarantee being called, I mean, by then you're winding the thing up though, aren't you?
Yeah, so I mean, the steps that need to happen before that guarantee gets called is effectively the CCO has to default on a loan. You've got an independent board overseeing the entity, so that board is not being able to meet its obligations under a loan from LGFA. It's likely that the Crown would have a view as to whether a Crown monitor might have needed to be appointed or some other Crown input into that. The SRF probably would have had a conversation with the board about maybe the need to put up some revenue or reduce some costs to be able to meet their financing obligations. All of those things have to have failed before the LGFA calls in a loan. So what LGFA has said is that just because you're breaching the prescribed covenants doesn't mean it's an automatic default. So it actually has to be a failure to repay almost. Yeah. 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 And the security is over revenue, just not assets. So it's the revenue that ultimately pays.
Yeah, and the shareholding councils have got the ability to unwind the CCO to get access back to the revenue. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Next steps. So timeline. So there's a council meeting next week where we will consider whether or not we agree to the content of the shareholders agreement.
Can I just be clear about that, please, Carl?
Yes, sorry.
That it is all in principle agreement because we will be holding the hearings next week after for Local Waters Done Well. week after next, and then obviously still making the final decision in July. But what we're coming to you next week about is the principles for resolution to adopt these constitutional documents in principle, so that should all councils agree, or when we all get to that point, there's actually becomes a very, very time pressured to meet the legislative obligations and the timing of the company being established. So what it's trying to do is just make sure that those things are ready should the decisions are made. I just want to be very clear about that.
Every council is got to meet that obligation.
Yes, every
next
council
week.
is, or at some
So
stage,
That
all
to me
the,
is quite critical. That's
Yep.
the-
every
the
council is
timeframe.
being asked to do the same, because these timeframes are so tight that should you be ready to go, should you make the decision, the documentation is ready to go.
And as I said earlier, some councils are making those final decisions next week. So
Yes, good point.
reasonably, they want visibility that everyone else is broadly comfortable with the documents.
Carl, that's useful.
And then, as Steph indicated, towards the end of July, we have a separate session meeting on whether we're proceeding with Waikato Water Done Well, and then subsequent to that, we're either in or out, and the company would be incorporated. So that's the timeline. That's a more detailed timeline. I wasn't intending to go through that, but it's sort of the purpose of that timeline slide is to just identify that, as Steph pointed out, the timeline is very tight, and some activities have to happen in parallel for order us to be prepared for 1 July 26. But there's nothing that's happening that couldn't be stopped if required. There are a set of draft resolutions, just to give you visibility. There will be a report coming out for the 25th of June meeting, which will have the final resolutions in. So they were just there for visibility, unless anyone's got any comments or questions on any of that. I guess the other thing is that those resolutions have been drafted in parallel with the other councils, so that everyone's comfortable that everyone's resolving the same thing, obviously taking into account our nuance of timing.
It's an orchestration. It's like a very large orchestra. Yeah.
Yeah, there's 3 pages of those, so they're quite long. So just some concluding comments. Obviously, we are the largest, well, not obviously, we are the largest group of councils in the country. That has been recognised by the Minister and by DIA. We've adopted a principle-based approach. We've kept those principles intact throughout this process. This is about the councils being aligned, the 7 shareholding councils being aligned and moving forward together. And whilst there's a lot of work to do, what we're doing here is establishing a sound set of foundations so that everyone can understand and be cognizant of the fact that we're all moving together on the same basis. And I think that is the last slide. So I don't know whether anyone's got any other questions or comments.
Yeah.
I haven't done all the work, to be fair.
I'll
take
too
the-
modest,
I'll take
too
the-
modest. There's been an awful lot of work from an awful lot of people up and down the rohi, and obviously legal advisors and on top of that. So, yeah, no other questions for Carl or Simon? Excellent. Great. Well, look, I want to thank you for taking us through those papers. Obviously, parts of it were well known at a high level, but it's really important that we all get across some of the finer detail as it starts being shaped up and firmed up. And I guess critically, we're looking at the time frame going forward now, and making sure that we meet those milestones and those timeframes appropriately. Fabulous. Thank you, Simon. You can sign off now. Have the rest of the